You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Welcome to Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. Each week, we'll take a deep dive into the world of volatility with in-depth analysis, trading activity reviews, strategy breakdowns, cutting-edge education, and much more. We'll also bring you exclusive conversations with the traders, researchers, and asset managers who are reshaping the volatility landscape. If it involves volatility, then you'll find it on Volatility Views. Volatility Views is brought to you by MIAX, one of the fastest, most efficient trading platforms in the world. MIAX is proud to bring you SPKEX volatility products. SPKEX options and futures are traded on the SPKEX Volatility Index, SPKE, offering pinpoint accuracy, radically faster dissemination, and a highly transparent settlement auction, all for ultra-low exchange fees. It's volatility reimagined. Learn more about SPKEX at myaxoptions.com/spikes. Options and futures involve risk and are not suitable for all investors. The statements made are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for financial or legal advice. And now, it's time to take a deep dive into the world of volatility. It's time for Volatility Views.
All right, everybody. That music means it is Friday. It is noon Central. It is 1 p.m. Eastern. Do you know what's going on in the world of volatility? Well, let's find out together. You tuned into the right show because it is time for Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-scintillating network upon which so many of you are binging these days. Of course, if you're on the on-demand side, as we know many of you are, just keep rating and reviewing. It really does help. Again, August did another record month. You folks are loving it. We love seeing so many folks coming in and enjoying the content. So if you like what you hear, this show, any of the shows, the full network, however you want to rate it, whatever platform you get it on, just put a little rating there. It does help all the new folks continue to discover the content. Of course, if you want to go above and beyond, you want exclusive shows in your lives, like great pro Q&As, as well as, of course, Options Oddities coming up a little bit later today. I got a feeling there's some weird paper to break down again this week, as there always is. You want to get access to those. You want to get access to the exclusive pro podcast feed that has those, that has all the shows we've done on that since we launched this thing over a year ago. Hard to believe it's been a year. Crazy how time flies. And then, of course, you want to get live access to this, every other show we do here on the network. We just gave away a sweet pro trading crate for August. We're getting ready to start gearing up, get in there for the September pro trading crate. So theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go for access to all that good stuff. The live, the exclusive shows, the giveaways, the goodness, and a whole bunch more. And speaking of that goodness, let's see who's joining me today to break down a little bit of the old volatility goodness, because we got some on the old screen today. Markets, it's one of those days, listeners. You don't like the markets, you don't like where they are, just wait 5 minutes. And joining me to help parse this volatility goodness, the greasiest of meatballs, Mr. Mark Sebastian from OptionPit.com. Mr. Meatball, welcome back to the program, sir.
Well, I'm glad to be here. What a day, huh? They have completely turned around this market. It looks kind of like a polar opposite of the way trading was yesterday.
Yeah, I was going to say, yesterday we talked the market up during the option block, and now looks like we have just started, and we've already talked the market down here on Volatility Views. So let's get to it then, listeners. A little bit of the old volatility review.
It's time to break down the latest developments in the volatility trading world. It's time for the Volatility Review.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Volatility Review, the portion of the program where we break down what the heck's going on from a vol trading and trending and analysis and unusual activity, all sorts of fun perspectives for not just today, but for the entirety of the week that's been unfolding on our trading screens. And as we mentioned, coming at the start of the show, this is one of these shows, listeners, Volatility Review is always challenging because you can't really prepare for it too far ahead of time. Just when you think you have a handle on what's going on for the day, the warm turns, the market shifts, and vol swings in the other direction. That's pretty much what we're seeing right now. We saw a pretty firm rally to start the day, listeners. We were back north in the S&P, back north of that mythical, magical 4,000 level. Looks like we got up to about 4,015 or so. Hung out there for a little bit, and then that was all she wrote. The bears said, "Have you seen these claws? Let me introduce you to these claws," because the bears are back out in force, dragging us all the way back below 4,000 and then some. 39 and a half or so, right around that level where we're bouncing around right now. So come far off those highs for the day, listeners, and also obviously well below the 4,000 level again. Bears said, you know what, 4,000 kids, sorry, cutting out those legs today. So as we're coming into showtime now, the sell-off continues. Most of the major indices off about 1/3%, S&P off 1/3%, Dow off close to that level. The NASDAQ leading the charge as it is wont to do, closing in on 0.75% to the dark side. So yeah, it's one of those days. We had done the show a couple hours earlier, very different show than we're doing right now. all our vol friends were starting to erode, starting to give it up for the weekend. Now they're getting it all back and then some. Spikes when we kicked off the show at about a 24 3/4, up about 0.75 point. It was down earlier today, listeners. Now getting it all back and then some. VIX cash, same deal, was right around 24.5 when we kicked off the show. That's up about 0.5 point from where we were this time last week. So no huge move. But then again, remember, they're getting back what they had already given up for the day and then adding on top of it. Of course, we have a weekend coming. Usually that weekend comes out, takes some vol with it. Not today, listeners. And then we have VVIX, the vol at about an 87. That was down precipitously. Now it's only down about 1 point from where it was this time last week. Viking actually up on the week, aka VSPKES. If you want to find that for yourselves, you're having a hard time finding it. Any of these spikes analytics we're talking about here on the show, for some reason your platform doesn't have it, hasn't propagated there. Then Simon's site, T3 Index, the number 3, and then index.com is the place to go for all of the products he's created there. So quotes on all of that. You can get the Bitcoin stuff there too, BitVol, all that good stuff, BitSkew. But you can find the Viking there as well. 104.5 listeners, up 4 points from where it was last week. So vol getting a little bit frothier again. Vol getting a little bit frothier again. Mr. Meatball, what are your thoughts here as the worm is now turning as we commence the show, sir?
Yeah, they are really coming after it now. We're watching the market kind of melt. We've had a nice, what is that, a 70-point swing today in the S&P. Our high is 40.18. We're 40. The low is 39.50. So we are right at. They've really swung things back around from positive to now nicely negative. I'd point out VIX is still a little bit down on the day, but I don't know how long that lasts if things persist. Will be interesting to see what the next 2 hours look like for trading.
Yes, indeed. We shall see. Interesting stuff here, listeners. Setting up for a fun one out here. Let's go around the horn. We just had Matt on the show last week, listeners, breaking down all the new developments out there in the land of spikes futures. Now that we have the ETPs, Spiky and SPKX. I don't know what you want to call the other one. Spiky rolls off the tongue more. Now that those are out there and listed and trading, we are seeing some more futures volume out there. So that should be interesting. We'll have them back on soon to detail what's going on that side. You hopefully are seeing it now reflected in the tighter options markets, which is the goal at the end of the day. Better options markets for all you folks out there. And staying on the futures front, let's go out to the land of the VIX futures. This is another one, Mr. Meatball. We'll probably have to re-rack these. I'm sure if we re-rack these right now, we do these, try to get these in ahead of time, but sometimes with the land of the old futures curve, that is not the case because, listeners, when we were setting up for the show, coming into the land of VIX futures, we had that front portion of the curve was obviously taking it on the chin a little bit. It was off about half a point from where it was this time last week in the SEP future, and the OCC future was down 0.75 of a point. And of course, like I said, if you don't like the vol landscape, wait 5 minutes. That is doubly true for the front portion of the VIX term structure, because if we re-rack it right now, listeners, it is a very different story. That front portion of the futures curve, the SEP contract, is actually up about 0.75 of a point. So it has swung over a point, about 1.25 points in the other direction. OCC future is up about 1/3 of a point now. Actually, no, I take it back. OCC future has moved a whole point. Yeah, so that was down 0.75 of a point. Now it's up about 1/4 of a point. So yeah, we're seeing big moves in the front portion of this futures curve, Mr. Meatball. What do you think? I think we're going to get backward before the end of the show, sir?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we're going to completely fall apart, but I don't know that we're going to make a run back at 4,000 either. The market looks like, the next hour is going to be very fun to watch. I'm really, by the end of the show, we've got 45 minutes left in the show. By the end of the show, we could be 39.25. We could be 30. We could be 4,000 again. The market is just very confused right now. Let's just put it that way.
Very confused indeed. So outside of the ever-evolving front portion of that curve today, what else is catching your eye in the vol surface this week, sir?
It was interesting up until, I think, today, right? Even though we sold off, it's not like vol really took off in the futures, right? We're about where we were in the futures, we're way lower, and the futures have really not moved very much. When we recorded last week, that was September 26th. All right. The VIX September future was 26.20. It's currently 25.40. The SPKX, on the other hand, and this is the danger of using futures, right? The SPKX closed on the 26th at 4,057.66. We're currently 3,968. We are $90 lower, and the VIX futures are down.
Crazy times, sir. Crazy times that we are living in. Since we're talking about the futures, let me dive into this really quick. Usually we do this on the option block, but our friends at OCC decided for whatever reason to release these numbers now during vol views. Don't they know our broadcast schedule by now? They should know this by now. So let's get into it now because the futures are part of this conversation. OCC releasing their numbers now for August, listeners. So we have more insight into whether this year is going to be a record-setting year or not. Mr. Meatball. If I told you that the August 2021 total options volume was 801 million contracts, would you guess that August of 2022 was more or less, sir? Higher or lower?
Well, knowing what I know, I would say it's less, but it's still absolutely astounding.
You might think, because we saw some light periods there in August, but actually, August of 2022, total volume 912 million contracts, up 13.3% compared to August of last year, the third highest month in the business, in history. So August of 2022 was not playing, listeners. Equity options, let's drill down a little bit, 526. That's actually down 6.3% from August. So equity options were not where folks were coming to play in August, which is interesting. ETFs and indexes were where all the action was, which makes sense. Remember, if you listen to our option block show, listeners, when we talk about these extreme macro days when we're seeing big swings, couple of percent in one direction or the other, lion's share of the paper is going to be concentrated in those big indexes. How often do we see the top 10 most actives looking pretty light on those days? We saw a lot of big index swings over the course of August. And so as a result, the ETF and index options both accounted for the lion's share of the paper. 318 million contracts for the ETF options. That's up from 199 million in August of last year. That's up nearly 60%. And index options, same deal, about 63 million, up from 39 million last year. So that's up about almost 60% as well. So huge gains in the ETF and index options, easily offsets the 6.3% decline in equity options. And what got us started on this, Mr. Meatball? I just gave you a hint so far. August 2021 VIX futures volume, 4.1 million contracts. Do you think we beat it this year or no?
I do not think we beat it.
You know, you're fading all this, sir. And 4.4 million contracts. So beat it by almost 300,000 contracts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's actually also almost exactly 300,000. It was 4.135 and 4.432 in August. So up 7.2%. So yeah, across the board, except for equity options, sir, it was a banger of a month. And ADV is now 40.5 million contracts through the end of August. That's up 4.2% from where it was this time last year. So I guess, Mr. Meatball, first off, all is right in the VIX futures land. And then B, it looks like we're on course for another record year, sir. What say you?
Good. Well, that would explain why SIBO's been rallying of late. There's been SPX and VIX have been blowing it up. Even seen some volume in RUT and in the NDX, but SPX has had some huge orders over the last few days. VIX has had some just massive calls go up. There is plenty of action on the index front. Kind of interesting and exciting to watch.
Yeah, just a record month across the board here, listeners. Really just a banger month here. The highest August in the history of options, the third most active month in the history of options. Huge gains, ETF options, index options, even the futures. You're right. I wasn't quite convinced that the VIX futures are going to have a banger month, but they even delivered. Wow. You know, for a long time, listeners, in the height of the pandemic, the ETF and index options very much lagged, and the futures were an afterthought. Nobody was touching the VIX futures. And because OCC, all they really clear are the VIX futures. And so to see this paper now, that's interesting. Again, shows you, even in the dog days of summer, not traditionally the most active period for options and certainly for futures. A banger month, over 900 million contracts. That's a lot, listeners. Let's get on out. Speaking of options and contracts, let's keep rolling. Let's get on out to the land of the volatility options. First, let's go to our friend Spikes. Good thing to see. I like seeing, I love talking the size prints, and we'll get to all that in VIX in a little bit, but I do like seeing the retail participation as well. And now it looks like that they partnered with Webull and is getting out there more for the retail platforms. The markets are tightening up with the futures. It is nice to see, you know, the 1 lots and the 5 lots and the 10 lots starting to really percolate through the Spikes option. So if you're listening to the show for a while and you're like, you know, I tried Spikes a while ago and they were kind of wide. I get it. They were. So it might be an interesting time to revisit it because things are tightening up and we're starting to see more retail paper as a result, which again is always a sign of a healthy ecosystem. You need the big funds to sling their 10,000 lots, of course, but you need the mom and pops doing their 3 lots and their 5 lots and their 8 lots too to make a healthy ecosystem. In terms of Spikes options, let's do a quick top 5 out here. It's not as, well, I take it back. It is ridiculous, but in a very different way than what we see in VIX options. It still has perhaps my favorite vol trade of the year here. This, we'll get to it in a second. First, number 5, we got the SEP 50, so looking optimistic there. Number 4, we got the SEP 12 half, so a very reasonable strike, all things considered. Then number 3 and 2 positions are, again, I don't know what to make of this. It cracks me up to no end. This is this OC 140, 180 put spread. Deep in the money put spread. I just love it. I love it so much. And then the number 1 position out there in Spikes options are the SEP 28s. Tell us, listeners, have you found a good use case for a 100+ point in the money puts in your volatility product of choice? If so, I'd be curious to hear it. Hit us up. Let us know. Getting out to VIX land, you know, VIX, it wasn't really playing ball with this, and it's still not really. It hasn't really budged pretty much since we've started the show. It's kind of been glued at 167,000 contracts. You'd think the warm turning out here would kind of open the floodgates for VIX. You know, VIX likes 2 things. VIX likes a lot of red on the screen, and it also likes swings intraday, and that usually tends to generate volume. We've seen both of those, not a ton of red yet, but a fair amount of red and a pretty hefty swing. And yet VIX options not really responding with their usual gusto, which is kind of strange. Only 167,000 contracts on the tape today. The ADV looking more respectable, going back up. It's about 414. It's up 42,000 contracts from where it was this time last week, listeners. But again, I think take some of that with a grain of salt. There were some glitches in the data towards the end of the week last week. Getting out to the top 10 size positions. What is open for size out here in VIX options this week? Let's find out, listeners. This week in our top 10, it is 9-1 calls over puts. So we're back call heavy again. Only one put to be found in our top 10. Cost you $1.52 to break into the top 10. That's kind of the same level it's been for a while now out here. That gets you back to the SEP 75s. So once again, we're back at it in VIX options again, listeners. Number 9, it's the SEP 30s. You kind of know this dance by now. We've done most of this for a while. The SEP 30s have been the most reasonable call strike on the block for a while. They remain the case this week. Number 8, $1.54 of our first and only put in our top 10. The SEP 22 puts. Then it's a hefty and optimistic call strip the rest of the way. Number 7, $1.59 of the NOV 80s. Number 6, $1.61 of the SEP 50s, 5-0s. Number 5, 168,000 of the OC 50s. Number 4, 186,000 of the OC. Actually, no, I take it back. There are 2 puts here in the top 10 list. And we have the OC 20 puts as well. So that a little bit more egalitarian here. We actually were able to find 2 puts instead of 1 out here this week, listeners. OC 20 puts, 186,000 of those for number 4. Then number 3, 200,000 exactly of the March 75s. Numero due, 230,000 of the NOV 70s. And number 1 with a decent size bullet, all things considered. It's our old friend, the OC 75s, back to the number 1 spot, 274,000 contracts on the tape. Like I mentioned, not a heck of a lot lighting it up out there today in VIX land, 167,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog today are the SEP 35s, 19,000 of those, followed by about 14,000 of the SEP 37 halves. It's been a while since we've seen these, I hate to call 35 reasonable, but compared to the rest of these strikes we talk about on a weekly basis, they are comparatively reasonable. SEP 35 is going up, 14,000 of the SEP 37 halves, then about 13,000 of the OC 30s. Number 4, 12,000 of the SEP 29 calls, and rounding out the top 5 today on an all call all the time day, nearly 12,000 of the OC 35s. All right, moving on out to Thursday. We had a little bit more paper on the tape. 633,000 to be precise, including a huge print, 105,000 of the Jan 70 calls. So once again, we're back at it, listeners. Followed by number 2, 79,000 of the OC 75. So you're talking almost 200,000 contracts just in those 2 trades and those 2, shall we say, optimistic strikes. Number 3, back to the OC 35s, 33,000 of those. That's that ratio spread going up again, maybe being unwound a little bit there, listeners. Number 4, 28,000 of the SEP 40s, and rounding out the top 5 on Thursday, 27,000 of the Jan 35. So here we go again, listeners, 1 by 5. 26,000 of the Jan 35s against, well, it's about 1 by 4 right here. About 105,000 of the Jan 70s here. But they do like that ratio. They've done it in just about every month throughout this year. Why not extend it into January as well? Wednesday, 205,000 contracts on the tape, so a pretty light day. The big dog then was 15,000, almost 16,000 of the SEP 30s. That's really all that's worth parsing, unless you want to talk about 7,401 of the Feb 22 puts. First Feb on the list in quite some time. Tuesday, a little bit more paper, 330,000 contracts. We had the big dog on Tuesday, 16,000 almost of the SEP 35s, back to that strike. Number 2, 12,000 of the NOV 45s. Number 3, about 11,000 of the SEP 30s. Number 4, 10,000 of the OC 22 puts. And rounding out the top 5 on Tuesday, 10,000 as well of the DEES 24 puts. And then Monday, a fairly active day, nearly 500,000 contracts, 496,000 to be precise, including a huge print that I know the meatball will want to talk about here. 154,000 of the OC 20 puts going up. That kind of just ran away with it the rest of the day, much lighter. 35,000 of the SEP 22 puts, 31,000 for number 3 of the SEP 23 puts. Number 4, 23,000 of the SEP 20 puts, and rounding out the top 5 on an all puts all the time day, about 15,000 of the SEP 21 puts. Mr. Meatball, it was a fairly light week this week. We'll see if today turns around. But I know there were a couple of prints that caught your eye. I know those OCT20 puts, and you probably have some thoughts on this 1x5 extending its run to January, and anything else that caught your eye out here this week, sir, in VIX options.
Yeah, there were a lot of crazy trades that went up in VIX this week. The biggest trade was, I believe, on Monday. I think it was Monday. They did a huge October put buy, I want to say. That was Monday, right? Yep. They bought 151,500 of the OCT20 puts tied to futures on a 5 delta. So far, the futures side of that has paid off. The puts have not.
I was going to say they're happy they got the futures side there this week.
Yeah. They also bought.
I wish they did it 1-to-1, maybe.
Yeah. They also bought some step 22s and 23s in bulk, and some. Those were busy. On Tuesday, it was a lot lighter. There really wasn't a lot of action on Tuesday. Biggest trade of the day was only about 9,000 contracts. Then on Wednesday, another relatively light day. Not a lot going on. Then we see Thursday. And on Thursday, they 1x5 us again. They got rid of they sold the October 35s, sold out of the OX 75s, and then they converted that to the Jan 3570 1x4, it looks like this time. And the 3575 is like 1x2.5. No, 1x3. So they've definitely changed up their strategy a little bit, but that was a massive trade. We're talking 250,000 contracts in one trade. That was they were not messing around with that one.
Yeah, it looks like they're dialing back the ratio a little bit. It was 1x5. Now they're going 1x4. So that's kind of interesting. So they're keeping the party alive, sir. They love this trade. Apparently, they're going to do it for the foreseeable future. They have no plans of dialing it back. They're going to do it in every expiration month that we have, and they're going to do it for size. So yeah, keep looking for these now 1x4s, I guess, listeners out there. I know on Monday you were kind of excited about those puts and futures. Walk our listeners through why were you so excited about that one?
Well, it was one, a huge trade, and two, it was built around the concept of the October future is trading at a massive premium to the cash index, and they were looking for some sort of, if vol relaxes between now and October, we could easily see VIX go back to the 20 range, and these puts are only 20 cents. They could double. They could easily double or go to 30 cents if VIX gets back to 20 and hangs around there and vol comes off. So it was a really interesting trade.
Kind of love those 5 delta tide trades. Again, listeners, they're wishing they had a lot more deltas on that one, I think, right now to the upside. But intriguing stuff out there nonetheless. Yeah, an interesting week, kind of a light week towards the middle of the week, but maybe we'll pick it up here in the latter portion. Yesterday, obviously, that 1x5 friend really just juicing up the numbers out there to high heaven. Let's keep on rolling. Like we mentioned, our friends SPKX, I guess you can call it, our regular vanilla flavor of Spike ETF, and then of course Spiky, our friend out there, both trading decent paper. Looks like SPKX having a little bit higher ADV right now than Spiky, but Spiky putting up more numbers today share wise. Obviously there are no options yet, even though Simon and Matt last week as well were both optimistic that we're going to see those options in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be nice to have some options to talk about on Spiky and SPKX. First off, Mr. Meatball, you're one of our resident branding experts here on the show. What do we call this SPKX? Because SPKX is not doing it for me.
And the Speakeasy.
Speakeasy?
Yeah.
Spiky, I get, because it's got a Y. How do you get Speakeasy from SPKX?
Well, Spiky, Speakeasy, people love Speakeasies. They're cool. They're trendy.
We're just adding all sorts of consonants and syllables to the word. Okay.
Yeah,
we'll play with it. We'll play with it.
We'll just quickly call it the Speakeasy. Hey, you trading the Speakeasy? Yes, I am.
Yes, I am. And I am also drunk at the same time because that's required when you're trading the Speakeasy. I know you had your one lot of spiky. How's that working out? So you loving it? You going big?
Oh, it's been gold. It's been gold, folks.
It's going to turn the year for Carmen Line right there. That one lot of spiky, listeners. Go big or go home. So have you guys dipped your toes into the Speakeasy? What do you think of that one, listeners? Vote on that one. I'm curious for your thoughts. Spiky rolls off the tongue. It's pretty obvious. Obviously, spiky is the 1.5 levered one as well. So I expected that one to kind of resonate a little bit more. Right now, ADV-wise, good old SPKX, the vanilla one, they're kind of the spike variation of VXX without all the nonsense associated with it. Think of it that way. That one actually has the higher ADV, which I suppose makes some sense. It is the more plain vanilla option. People can wrap their heads around it. Maybe they're a little bit intimidated by the levered aspect of spiky. Either way, they're both trading it up here this week. And hopefully, we will have some options out there post-haste, listeners. Let's get on out to a product that we thought was going to really light the world on fire from an options perspective, certainly from a lot of interest before it launched perspective. It's our old friend SVIX, the inverse product. And it was looking, before we kicked off the show, listeners, pretty much unched on the week at a 13. It has now given up that ghost substantially. It is down to about a 1240. That puts it down about 0.6 of a point so far on the week. Of course, not surprising. The SVIX product will be down. It is the inverse product on a day when the vol is popping, listeners. The ADV is still looking pretty anemic, a little bit north of 600 contracts a day. So clearly, SVIX not lighting the world on fire out there, listeners. In terms of top positions, we'll just do a quick top 5 for SVIX. Number 1, we have about 800 of the SEP 13 calls. Number 2, about 700 of the March 8 puts. Number 3, 500 of the OC 19 calls. Number 4, 406 of the Jan 6 puts. And rounding out the top 5, and pretty anemic product, 333 of the DEES 8 puts. Mr. Meatball, have you had any opportunity to revisit or perhaps dabble in good old SVIX since last we spoke, sir?
No, but it is not having a great day, is it? Not a great day to be SVIX. Because vol has definitely turned. Although, again, because of the nature of VIX, it's not like it's really taken a big beating. After Friday's drubbing, it's actually, we're down, and it is up on the week, up Friday over Friday. It closed 1228. It's currently 1237. And that is the nature of VIX futures, people.
The majesty, the magic of VIX futures. And we had this question before from listeners, and it's a fun kind of thought question. Obviously, any product can go to zero. And this SVIX, as you've seen with the XIV, is no exception. It can go to zero. We've had a lot of listeners ask since it launched, what reasonably do you think is a reasonable floor, like how low it can get, kind of regular day-to-day trading out there in SVIX? Have you thought about this, Mr. Meatball? What do you think is a reasonable floor? Obviously, again, anything can go to zero in crazy markets, but in regular trading markets, it's kind of just drifting lower. What do you think is a reasonable floor for SVIX?
Ooh, I don't know. It could get to, they'll reverse split it if it goes too low, won't they?
I don't know. We have no prior history for this one. UVIX, I have a handle on when they're going to come reverse split it. I don't know with SVIX what their plan is. I would assume, but what is that level, right? Is it half a point? Is it 1? Is it something else? So who knows? So yeah, it's an intriguing question, and obviously, again, if past his prologue, XIV paved the way. Anything can go to zero, especially on the inverse side, listeners. But it is an interesting question, especially if you're out there trying to, as we don't recommend you do, but we know people are doing this. We know people are buying and holding SVIX. So if you're doing that, A, stop. And then B, that's a very important question for those people. They want to know how low this thing can do. Maybe we should look the people who've asked that question. We should write back to them and say, by the way, you're not buying and holding this thing, are you? Because if so, it's the wrong way to do it. In terms of action out there today for UVIX, we'll get to the top trades out here in UVIX in a second. Let's go out. Let's break it down. What's going on out there right now? UVIX, another one. It was kind of unched when we kicked off the show. Not a heck of a lot popping off out there. And now, as the show has progressed, sell off getting a little bit of teeth. UVIX getting a little bit of legs out there. It's up about a point, 10.5 or so right now. Looking at some decent numbers too, nearly 7,000 contracts on the tape. That's already north of the ADV, which is about a little bit north of 6,000, which is already up 1,600 contracts from where it was a week ago. So the ADV is growing, the paper is growing. So UVIX really starting to separate itself from the pack, with the pack of two right now, UVIX and SVIX, and leaving kind of SVIX in the dust. A lot of paper going up here in UVIX, certainly comparatively. Let's do a quick top five here in UVIX as well, the top positions. Let's go from the bottom this time. Number 5, 1,775 of the SEP8 calls. Number 4, 2,000 of the DS18 puts. Number 3, 2,800 of the SEP8 puts. Number 2, 4,100 of the SEP10 puts. And rounding out the top positions in UVIX right now, 4,200 of the SEP12 calls out there. In terms of action today, like I said, we're seeing some decent paper. Looks like the lion's share of it, 2,632, coming in the aforementioned SEP12 call. So that is the strike du jour, listeners. Are they closing those bad boys out? Are they piling in to an already pretty sizable position? Let's see. Looks like they're buying a lot of these calls for 40 cents, lifting offers on these calls. So they could be piling into more. I'll have to go dig in a little bit further to see when they open these bad boys. Yeah, so size positioning right now on the SEP12 strike, and it appears there's more going up today. So looks like SEP12 is the strike du jour out there, followed by about 400, 500 of the SEP8 puts and about 300 of the SEP10 puts out there. Mr. Meatball, have you or your crazies been delving in a little bit of UVIX this week? And then B, what do you think of the new strike du jour out there? These SEP12s going up for size yet again, sir.
Yeah, they were busy, weren't they? And yeah, I actually delved in some UVIX today. On the highs, I bought some of the 10 calls for a dime, and that has paid off pretty handsomely so far. They're 40 cents.
That is nice. I'm just looking here while we're talking. Looks like they were buying some of these SEP12 calls. They opened a fair amount of them back not that long ago, just earlier this week, Tuesday, August 30th. They opened a lot of these Tuesday, August 30th, listeners, buying them for a little bit higher levels, 95 cents, 90 cents, 500 lots swinging here and there, 85 cents, 90 cents again. So they were loading up on a fair amount of them here. About 3,000 going up on Tuesday. So it stands to reason they're probably buying more and averaging down because they're getting them for around 50 cents today. So obviously they have not gone their way so far, but we shall see. If today's action is anything to keep in mind, those 12s may end up looking much better. Certainly back to where they bought them earlier this week for 90 odd cents. Let's get on out to a product. I really don't know what to make of this thing at this point. VXX, it's... I don't know, broken, I guess. Is that the technical term for it now? It was at a 19 when we kicked off the show, down about 1.2 points. It's now at about a 19.30. So that puts it down, a whopping 0.9. So you could see it is completely disassociated from everything else that's going on in the volatility space out there these days, listeners. Doing not much paper today either. 27,000 contracts. The ADV is an anemic 51,000. It continues to erode, down another 4,000 contracts this week. Top positions, nothing really to write home about, except for that same strike that someone has just been super jazzed for a while about, the 16 strike here. Remember, the AUG 16 puts had a lot of action. Now the number one position out here are the SEP 16 puts, about 32,000 of those. If you're wondering, there are a couple of calls open in the top 10 for VXX, 2 to be precise. It is 8-2 calls over puts out here. I mean, it's mostly puts still, including the big dog, 32,000 of the SEP 16 puts and 26,000 of the SEP 18 puts. We'll do a quick top five run out. 25,000 for number 3 of the SEP 19 puts. Number 4, 22,000 of the SEP 20 puts. And rounding out the top 5 here, it's like these are still pre-split adjusted. Wow, there still are some of those legacy positions hanging around. 15,000 of the Jan 3 puts, the VXX ones. Don't see a lot of those anymore. Floating around in the top 5 out there. Man, what a weird product these days. Mr. Meatball, do you have any use case for VXX anymore, or have you completely washed your hands of it?
I've completely washed my hands. I got to be honest. It's not something I'm using or paying too much attention to.
I mean, how can you? It is completely unreliable, right?
Yes.
It's down on a day when everything else is up. Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria. Speaking of things that were down, UVXY, its natural inclination is to want to go down. It wants to go to zero, listeners. It wants to wipe itself out of existence. And it was looking that way for a while. It was down about a quarter of a point. It was trading 9.5 right before we kicked off the show. Now, as we're hanging out here, it's hanging out at about 10.25. So that puts it up about half a point on the week right now. So all you folks still wondering about when this reverse split is coming, if we keep getting these intraday vol pops and keep lifting us over the 10 handle, then the answer yet again is not today, listeners. Again, 225,000 contracts on the tape in UVXY. The ADV, 261,000 contracts, up 21,000 from this time last week. So UVXY putting up some numbers out there. Let's do a little top 5 out here in UVXY. By the way, if you are wondering, there are 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 60-40 right now. Calls over puts out here in UVXY. UVXY, folks like their puts, but recently it has been very call heavy. It was 70-30 last week, so has come in a little bit, but still more calls than you might think hanging out in the top 10 of UVXY. Number 5, 14,000 of the SEP 46s. Exhibit A, SEP 46s. Folks love that extreme upside, and this has been going on even before we saw it in the VIX side. And it wasn't all buying. Usually it was a lot of size overwriting up there, which is kind of interesting. They were getting more premium than you might think. I remember last year it used to be the SEP 75s was the hot strike. These days, I guess it's the SEP 46s. And number 4, 14,000 of the SEP 11 calls. Number 3, 14,000 as well of the SEP 15s. Numero due out here, 15,000 of the SEP expiring today, 9.5 puts. By the way, the 11 calls also expiring today. So those are in the weeklies. And then number 1 out here, 20,000, pretty much exactly, of the expiring today SEP 10 puts. So a lot of action out here. Those puts, once again, they were looking good. They were looking great. This product. This product is such a heartbreaker. 20,000 of these, I mean, if past is prologue, most of those are probably buys. And those folks were looking good. Hopefully they got a chance to get some out. We shall see. I'll have to dig into the paper for today. In fact, let's do that right now. The big print today is actually the SEP expiring today, 10 calls. 18,000 of those have traded. Not exactly surprising because we did pop through that strike, but I'm looking for the folks coming for their 10 puts. 18,000 as well of the SEP expiring today, 9.5 puts. Hopefully they got the heck out of Dodge while the getting was good. Here we go. Number 3, about 14,000 of the SEP expiring today, 10 puts. So let's hope some of those folks were closing sales and they got them off right at the nadir this morning. Let's be optimistic and let's think that. If past is prologue, that is probably not the case, but let's hope it anyway. Number 4, 12,000 of the SEP, it's all expiring today pretty much, 9.5 calls, and then 7,200 of the 9.5 puts out there. So intriguing stuff. Mr. Meatball, a lot of rocking and rolling out here in UVXY. It seems like, given what we've seen in the past, there's going to be some broken hearts yet again on the SEP 10 strike here. But what are your thoughts? What's lighting up your tape out there in UVXY this week, sir?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're expiring today. You've got 40,000 of the 10s trading. You've got 34,000 of the 10 puts. It is a day here for UVXY. It is moving around pretty substantially. So pretty interesting to see and watch. And, I intend to enjoy watching the end of the day. I really want to know where we're going to be. And watch we pin 39.50 or something so cryptic for SPX, and then UVXY ends up down on the day. That would be classic UVXY behavior. That
would be. And then right back to that 9.5 strike again, little pin right there, breaking hearts across the board. Any of your crazy slinging any UVXY this week, sir?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure they were involved. They love their UVXY.
Let's hope they're not getting run over on these SEP 10 puts today, because those seem like they're going to leave a bit of a stain. But hey, you know what? The day is young. Anything could happen in UVXY. If you had them and you're getting run over, then maybe you hope for that turnaround later in the day. Like we said, UVXY, it wants to go to zero. If it has its druthers, it will go that way. It's just the market not exactly playing ball out there this week. Speaking of the market this week, we did still see a lot of earnings on the docket this week. If you guys like yourselves a little bit of earnings vol, you know where to go for all the latest reports, all the season reports, the earnings trades reports, all the vol breakdowns. Because we like you folks completely for free, theoptionsinsider.com is the place to go. Click on that options news and articles tab. You'll see all the options, move reports, result reports, till your heart's content, listeners. I mean, you even have some really detailed single name deep dives that Matt and his team over there at Orats do on particular tickers. They haven't checked those out. Those are pretty crazy. They get pretty detailed. It's like everything you wanted to know and then some about the history of ticker X and how it performs during earnings cycles. Really fascinating stuff. This week, still have some big names popping off. Tuesday, we had Best Buy, Big Lots, Chewy, and good old HP. Wednesday, Vera Bradley. So if you like your really loud floral prints, you were a happy camper maybe on Wednesday. And also Five Below, you like premium dollar stores. Wednesday had you covered. Thursday, we had Campbell Soup. A lot of soup vol on Wednesday. We had Campbell Soup and Hormel Foods back to back. That's kind of the entire soup category encapsulated into one. Build-A-Bear, Workshop, Ollie's, my new favorite. I've never been there. I just know about it from Brian's show and seeing it come up on our odd block scans. But Ollie's Bargain Outlets, not founded by Ollie, weirdly enough. Broadcom, Lululemon, and 1-800-Flowers. We had some hot names popping off yesterday, including Five Below and Ollie's. We broke those down on the old option blog yesterday. Yesterday, after the bell, we did have Lululemon, they of the sheer yoga pants infamy. Going into their announcement, they were hanging out right around $300. They were pricing in $19.60 on that straddle. In the past, they've moved $16.25. And wow, they are moving $19.20 right now. So they're pretty much almost exactly in line with what they were pricing in. Wow, that is impressive. You don't usually see it line up that aggressively. Looks like, let's see, they popped a little bit more this morning. If you took the entirety of the day, again, we kind of take these reports, just look at the immediate vol impact right after the announcement kind of thing. We don't let it go throughout the day. If you expand your frame of reference, obviously, we had a little bit more of a pop. We got up to a high of almost 330, 329.64. So that's an expansive move and now has given most of that back. So if you were long gamma and were diligent about it, you could have made some money on this trade, obviously, as well. But net, the people who were betting not a heck of a lot of net beyond that straddle are looking okay. That's interesting. We are right at that level. And then we have coming up next week, we have NEO. This is the name I know a lot of you like to watch. It's usually in our frequent offenders on our top 10. NEO was trading $19.91 when we ran this report. They were pricing in $1.57. In the past, they've moved $2.47, listeners. So a lot less juice in NEO, which is interesting. Also interesting given the fact that the stock is now $2 lower from when we ran these reports. So this stock has packed a heck of a lot of living in already. And they're not even at their earnings yet, listeners. We also have GameStop coming up this week on the 7th. You may have heard of them. So all you think earnings season is over, not quite yet. The apes are still ready to play. The 7th after the bell, 28.64 is where GameStop was at the time we ran this report. They were pricing in $3.49. In the past, they've moved $3.61. So actually a little bit light on the earnings vol front, which is interesting given GameStop's history. And right now looks like it's trading about $1.20 below where it was at this report. So it's already been moving a bit as well. Let's go out to a sector that's kind of just been having a hard time since the onset of the pandemic. This is Dave & Buster's. In-person, high-touch things like this, having a hard time. Ticker symbol play, obviously. They're the 7th after the bell as well. 41.34 is where they were trading as of this report, and they're pretty much exactly still there, so that's refreshing. They're pricing in $3.61. In the past, they moved $2.47. So a fair amount of extra juice in Dave & Buster's as well, listeners. Intriguing stuff. Of course, for the season, as I mentioned, we are looking at pretty much the most robust season we've seen since the start of the pandemic. 126% right now. That means effectively, if you took all the straddles that were priced in for all the thousands of names that we track across the entirety of the cycle, and you average them all out, if they all moved exactly what they were pricing in, that would be 100%. So we moved 126%. So on aggregate, we actually outperformed dramatically from a vol perspective this side, which is, again, the biggest, most impressive move we've seen since the onset of the pandemic. We've been averaging about 86% since the pandemic began. So that is a lot of juice out here, listeners. In terms of earnings trades, they added some new ones in. They bought a straddle in Ollie's, and they bought a calendar in Lululemon and a few others. We are now tracking 94 long straddles and 67 long calendars for your trading pleasure and edumacation out there, listeners. Now, speaking of you folks, let's get to some of you now. It is time for the volatility voicemail.
It's time to share your thoughts and opinions with your fellow volatility traders. It's time to check the volatility voicemail. Make your voice heard by dialing 779-669-4VOL. Posting a comment on the optionsinsider.com, sending an email to questions@theoptionsinsider.com, or posting your questions to twitter.com/options or facebook.com/theoptionsinsider.
All right, everybody, welcome to your segment, the Vol Voicemail. Mr. Meatball, seems like our chat not down with your Speakeasy suggestion. They say Speakeasies were trendy in the 20s, just the 1920s, not the 2020s, sir. So they're not down with Speakeasy. What do you say?
I say that they're not cool people that live in New York, because if you lived in New York, you would be all about the Speakeasy.
Well, Speakeasies were pretty big here in Chicago as well. I think there might have been one or two. Mr. Capone may have had a couple.
I would bet you.
All right, let's get to some of these questions of the week. We asked you last week, in this period of uncertainty, which options trades are you utilizing in your portfolio? Gave you 4 choices for strategy categories, effectively. Short puts or put spreads, long calls or call spreads, ratio spreads or butterflies, or collars or risk reversals. We thought, given how many sell-offs we've seen of late, collars would do a little bit better. Nope, they came in dead last. Short puts and put spreads, 49% of you choosing that, followed by 22.4% for number 2. Long calls and call spreads, so getting a little run over this week, maybe. Number 3, ratio spreads and fly, 16.3%. And then bringing up the rear, 12.2% only for collars and risk reversals. I wonder if we ran that right now, if those numbers would be exactly the same. We shall see. This week, we're asking you, listeners, the markets were rocked by Powell last week and are still down to start the week. Does the second leg of the inflation sell-off have legs, or will the bulls return with a vengeance? Quite simply, where do you think the S is going to close at the end of Q3? Gave you 4 regions, so fairly higher, north of 4,300. We were there not too long ago, listeners. In the range we were when we posted this poll earlier this week, which is 4,000 to 4,300. Lower, 3,700 to about 3,999, or much lower, below 3,700. Mr. Meatball, it's like much lower is winning, at least in today's action, because, man, they're still coming for this market, but we'll get to that in a second. What do you think our audience is voting for, and what are you voting for where we'll be at the end of Q3, sir?
Yeah, I think they're going for what was the 3,750 to 4,000? What was the range?
3,700 to 3,999.
I think that's the winner, and that's about where I land as well.
Let's see where our audience is landing. And yes, it just concluded as we're coming to the end of the show, listeners. And 41.2% of you chose the 3,700 to 3,999 tranche out there, followed by 21.6% for the 4,000 to 4,299. And then an actual tie between, for the wings, that's kind of weird, north of 4,300 and below 3,700, both got 18.6% of the vote, Mr. Meatball. Isn't that weird?
Indeed it is. It is very, very weird. But, it makes sense.
Speaking of weird, really quickly, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. We had another flash poll this week. I'm sure you saw this article in the Journal this week, Mr. Meatball, claiming the options market was a big driver of what we saw out there this summer from the rally perspective. And it was particularly options expiration that was kind of the point of demarcation for the beginning and end of the rally. We were kind of debating that article on our Options Bootcamp show earlier this week. We put it out to our audience. We said the Wall Street Journal claims that the options market was a primary driver for the market rally and the VIX decline over the summer. Do you agree? And it ended up trending closer to even than I thought. No 60%, yes 40%. Nobody choosing what is gamma, which is nice. Mr. Meatball, did you see that article? And what are your thoughts on it, sir, if you did?
I did. And I'm not totally surprised. I mean, there has been a ton of index option trading, and, going at expiration, you can see a lot of volume driven by those indexes, right? We can see a ton of it. So yeah, it makes some sense to me.
You're down for it. You're putting down what the journal is selling. Let's see if we're putting down what you folks are selling now, listeners. It is time to pay off our predictions and make new ones. It is time for the crystal ball.
It's time to peer into the future and reveal what the volatility gods hold in store. It's time to look into the crystal ball.
All right, everybody, let's get to it. And you know what? I should have ended the show a little bit earlier. I would have been right near my level. Alas, we have moved beyond it. That's why the vol gods are so fickle. I was putting down a little bit more vol. I actually liked where Matt was last week. I was north of 25, but he went there first. He went 25.10. So being the nice host that I am, I actually lowered myself to 24.65, as you'll recall if you heard the show last week. So nice guy that I was. I went higher, but I wanted to be even higher, listeners. If I had done that, if I had gone my original prediction, I would have been looking even better right now, because VIX is right around a 25.60, spikes at a 25.39 right now. So Matt gets the closest. None of us were within the 10th of a point margin of victory out here. I was at 24.65, so I was about close to a point away on VIX and a little bit less than a point away on spikes. Mr. Meatball with his palindromic ducks, 22.22, getting no love out there. So I guess that means we have to do it all again for next week, listeners. So you know what? I guess I was closest, even though I did not win. So I guess I will go first. I will give the Meatball some time to pontificate his palindromic number for this week. We're in the 25 range. North or south of this line? That is the great question here, listeners. I was feeling north last week. Do I still have north in me? It's going to take a fair amount to keep us up here. But you know what? The market, they're not loving it. By the way, listeners, the sell-off has exacerbated as the show has continued. We're off a full 1% in the S&P now, 1.4% in the NASDAQ, and closing in on 9% in the Dow. So huge swing, 2+% swing on the S&P intraday here. So they are coming for this. So past his prologue, I'm going to go out. I'm going to say higher. I'm going to say we're going to be 27.24 for this time next week. Mr. Meatball, what you got? Higher, lower? You want to go 27.23? What are you feeling?
I'm going to go, let's see. I'm going to go 23.32.
Lower? You think that after today, there's going to be a nice gentle rally? It's going to come with the ball again?
Who knows, right?
We know. That's how we're doing the show. We know. We're just not telling the listeners until next week.
Oh, is that what it is?
That's what it is. We know here on the show.
Okay.
All right, listeners, there is your market. Pretty wide one this week. Nearly four handles, 27.25 on the upside, 23.32 to the dark side. What's your prognostication? Send it in. Hit us up. Let us know. If you're close, within a 10th of a point, you can win fabulous prizes here. All right, listeners, that music means we have come to the end of the vol journey for this week. Be sure to tune in next week. Should be a fun one, listeners. I have a feeling. But before we go, let's go around the horn. Mr. Meatball, sir. If folks want to discuss all this vol stuff and a whole bunch more, where should they go? What should they do?
Go to optionpit.com. I'm writing the VIX Edge blog every day. It is worth a read.
There you go. Get your VIX Edge reading. The VIX Edge out there. Start your journey, optionpit.com. And you know where to start your vol journey, especially if you want to learn about all things spikes. MyAxOptions.com/spikes. A lot of great data there, including access to shift search and now Nick's quick strike stuff. So that's a really cool, powerful combo. And it's all free. That's amazing. So you folks can get at some of the stuff you've been asking for a long time. You like our TWIFO show, you want to see some of that quick skew stuff brought over to the equity option space. Well, there you go. Now you got your wish. Click on the MyAxOptions.com/spikes link. It'll get you all that good stuff. And I've heard, a little birdie has told me, A brand new coat of paint is coming to all this, so it's going to have all kinds of new stuff coming soon, so it's going to get even better. But right now, a lot of great free tools available for you over there for your vol trading information, education, and a little bit of fun as well. That's going to do it for us here on the network this week. For all of you on the on-demand side, that's going to be the conclusion of your broadcast week. I want to thank all of you for joining us this week. All you pro folks, hang out. We'll be back in a little bit to break down the wild, wondrous, whimsical world of unusual activity on Options Oddities. Obviously, we're off on Monday, so no shows on Monday. Back again next Friday, another episode of Volatility Views. Stay safe out there, everybody.
Volatility Views is brought to you by MIAX, one of the fastest options platforms in the world. MIAX is now trading options on the SPKEX Volatility Index, offering pinpoint accuracy, radically faster dissemination, and a highly transparent settlement auction for confident trading, all for competitive exchange fees. It's time to make a change and give yourself an edge with SPKEX. Learn more about SPKEX at www.miaxoptions.com/spikes. Options involve risk and are not suitable for all investors. The statements made are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for financial or legal advice. Volatility Views is also brought to you by Matrix Executions, LLC, an agency broker-dealer focused on best execution and trading workflow automation. A technology-driven firm, Matrix is led by trading pioneers with decades of experience designing and building best-in-class solutions for options markets. Matrix connects to all domestic exchange venues and multiple international exchanges and serves both institutional and individual clients. For more information on Matrix Executions, LLC, please visit matrixexecutions.com. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.